morning of July 20th, 1942, arrived hot and sticky in the South Pacific. On Espiritu Santo, something extraordinary was underway. In place of the dense jungle that had covered the area just 20 days prior, American bulldozers were completing a 6,000 FT airstrip. The 3rd Construction Battalion Detachment of the U.S. Navy Seabees had achieved with 6 tractors, 2 scrapers, and 387 men what Japanese military planners had assumed would require months and thousands of workers. No Japanese diary survives describing this event, but intelligence reports and post-war interrogations confirm that the Japanese had badly underestimated American engineering abilities. Pre-war Japanese assessments, preserved in translated ATIS documents, predicted that Americans would need at least 12 months to prepare for offensive operations after capturing a territory. The reality proved far different. The Japanese experience of American construction was not recorded in diaries or personal memoirs. Most such records were lost. Instead, it appears through American construction records, Japanese strategic decisions reflecting their awareness of this capability, and the limited surviving Japanese documents. Facts and statistics show the scale of the shock. Japanese commanders confronted an enemy whose engineering and industrial abilities far exceeded their expectations. The first large-scale Japanese encounter with U.S. construction came during the Guadalcanal campaign, although its significance was not immediately clear. When American Marines landed on August 7, 1942, they found a nearly finished Japanese airfield at Lunga Point. The Japanese had mobilized 2,774 workers, 1,379 Japanese, 145 Koreans and 250 local civilians over more than a month to build Henderson Field. Within 6 days, American forces had the airfield operational. The 6th Naval Construction Battalion, the 1st CB unit to see combat, arrived on September 1, 1942, with 387 men and 5 officers. They immediately began expanding and improving Henderson Field while under constant attack. Japanese forces based at Rabaul carried out daily noon raids with Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers. On the night of October 13th, 14th, 1942, Japanese battleships Kongo and Haruna fired over 9 104-in shells at the airfield, creating 53 craters in the runway. By dawn on October 15th, the runway was fully operational again. These events forced the Japanese to confront the speed and efficiency of American construction. Admiral Yamamoto redirected the fleet's primary mission from supporting ground operations to targeting Henderson Field. The Tokyo Express, high-speed destroyer supply runs, were adjusted to avoid slower transport vessels threatened by Henderson Field. This change in logistics contributed directly to the eventual starvation and defeat of Japanese forces on Guadalcanal. Colonel Ichiki led the first major Japanese counterattack against Henderson Field, believing his 9,107-man force could reclaim it. They were wiped out at the Battle of the Tenaru on August 21, 1942. Ichiki's papers were destroyed, but captured operational orders show the Japanese expected a partially complete, lightly defended airfield. Instead, they faced a fully operational base with 31 Marine aircraft. Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake, commanding the Japanese 17th Army, launched 3 major attempts to recapture Henderson Field between August and November 1942. Each attack assumed that a damaged airfield would take weeks to repair. After the October bombardment, his staff believed the field would be inoperative for at least a week. In reality, repairs were completed within hours, forcing a strategic reassessment. In 1943, as American forces moved across the Central Pacific, the speed of their construction became increasingly obvious. The Gilbert Islands campaign highlighted this at Tarawa. The 74th Naval Construction Battalion landed with Marines from November 20th to 23rd, 1943. Japanese defenders, around 5,000 troops from the 3rd Special Naval Landing Force and 7th CISPO Special Naval Landing Force, had spent months fortifying Betio Island and building a 4,500 FT airstrip by hand. The Americans repaired the battle-damaged airfield in just 15 hours, according to official CB action reports. Most Japanese defenders died in the final banzai charge. The impact on Japanese planning was immediate. Captured intelligence shows Japanese officers recalculating, realizing Americans could secure air superiority in days, not weeks. The Marshall Islands operations in early 1944 confirmed this reality. At Kwajalein, the 121st Construction Battalion transformed captured Japanese facilities into a major aviation base. The 110th Naval Construction Battalion repaired a damaged Japanese runway into a C-800 FT bomber strip supporting B-24 operations against truck Japanese. Intelligence consistently underestimated American construction capacity. Pre-war estimates predicted 5 million tons of merchant shipping production for 1943. Actual production reached 19.2 million tons, nearly 4 times the expectation. Navy personnel estimates also fell far short. Japanese documents predicted 13,070 officers and 296,000 enlisted men by December 1943. The actual numbers were 219,279 officers, 124,472 officer candidates, and 234,343 enlisted men, over 7 times their projection. Japanese doctrine expected months for major airfield projects. They had no concept for rapid mechanized construction. Units like the 17th Setai and the Solomons used basic hand tools, unable to match the speed, scale, and efficiency of American naval construction battalions. Japanese engineers relied on 900 shovels, 90 hoses, and a few rollers. They could not imagine that American aviation engineer battalions would arrive with over 140 vehicles and more than 200 pieces of construction equipment each. The Mariana Islands campaign in the summer of 1944 made the gap in construction abilities painfully clear. These islands were critical, intended as bases for B-29 bombers targeting Japan. Lieutenant General Yoshitsugu Saito, commanding the Japanese 43rd Division on Saipan, confronted American construction methods that defied every assumption in Japanese military doctrine. Saipan's Aslito Airfield fell to U.S. forces on June 18, 1944, only 3 days after the invasion began. Within 4 days, the 3rd Battalion of the 20th Marines, working with the 121st and 18th Construction Battalions, had the airfield ready for P-47 fighters. By July, even as combat continued in Saipan's northern mountains, the airfield was being upgraded to handle B-29 Superfortress bombers. The first B-29, Jolton Josie of the 73rd Bombardment Wing, landed on October 12, 1944. General Saito did not survive the campaign. He committed suicide on July 7, 1944, as American forces closed in. His last orders, preserved in translation, demonstrate his understanding of the threat posed by rapid airfield construction. The barbaric attack of the enemy is being continued. It is expected that the enemy will launch a general all-out attack. I will defend the sovereign's domain unto death. I will never suffer the disgrace of being captured alive. Saito recognized that Saipan's airfields would put Tokyo within bomber range, but he could not fully grasp the scale of American engineering that would follow. Transforming Saipan into a major B-29 base required moving millions of tons of coral and earth. American CBS operated Caterpillar D7 and D8 bulldozers 20 hours per day, reserving 4 hours for maintenance. The D8, with 148 horsepower and hydraulic controls, could replace the work of hundreds of manual laborers. The Japanese had no comparable equipment. Captured 17th. Setai construction unit records from the Solomons show their inventory included 5 trucks, 1 steamroller, and hand tools. Japanese commanders had assumed fortifying positions would take months. American CBS repeatedly built multiple operational airfields in just weeks. Even more startling to Japanese observers was that these engineers worked under fire. Japanese doctrine emphasized Yamato Damashi, the warrior spirit, over equipment or technical skill. At Saipan, engineers were both fighters and builders. The 121st Construction Battalion had originally been assigned to the Marine Corps. Its men fought as infantry while simultaneously operating heavy construction machinery. This dual capability, combat effectiveness plus technical skill, was entirely new to Japanese experience. If Saipan amazed Japanese commanders, Tinian was beyond comprehension. Between July 1944 and May 1945, the 6th Naval Construction Brigade, consisting of 15,000 CBS, transformed Tinian into the largest bomber base in the world. Official Naval Construction Battalion records confirm the scope. 6 8,500 FT runways carved from jungle and coral. Northfield had 4 parallel runways, each capable of launching B-29s on 3,000 Mi round trips to Japan. Westfield added 2 more runways. The volume of coral moved, blasted, and compacted equaled filling Hoover Dam 3 times. Japanese forces on Tinian, commanded by Colonel Kiyoshi Ogata, numbered about 9,000 troops. Most died defending the island, but even during battle, the speed of American construction was evident. CBS landed with the assault waves on July 24, 1944. By August 1st, while Japanese forces still controlled the southern part of the island, American engineers were repairing and extending the former Japanese fighter strip at Northfield. The Japanese had built their original Tinian airfields over months using forced labor from Chamorros and Koreans. A captured Japanese engineering report, translated by ATIS, detailed their methods: manual coral crushing, hand mixing concrete, and basic tools like picks and shovels. The report estimated that extending a runway by 1,000 FT would require 1,000 laborers working for 2 months. American CBS, by contrast, extended runways by 4,000 FT in under 30 days. The psychological impact on surviving Japanese personnel is clear from Office of Naval Intelligence interrogations. While primarily focused on military intelligence, several prisoners specifically noted amazement at American equipment. One captured Naval Construction Unit member said, "We could not compete with the U.S. Navy method that used bulldozer and power shovel versus our method that used shovel and scoop by humans." Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, commanding the Japanese garrison on Iwo Jima, had a rare understanding of American industrial power. He served as a military attaché in Washington, D.C. from 1928 to 1930, and traveled extensively in the United States. His letters, later published as picture letters from the Commander-in-Chief, provide some of the few surviving Japanese perspectives on U.S. capabilities. By February 19, 1945, when American Marines landed at Iwo Jima, Kuribayashi commanded about 21,000 defenders. He had spent months turning the island into an underground fortress, with Japanese construction troops building 11 mi of tunnels, hidden command posts, and concealed artillery positions. One of the most extensive Japanese construction efforts of the war. American construction philosophy contrasted sharply: speed over concealment, mechanical power over manual labor. The 31st and 133rd Naval Construction Battalions landed with assault waves. The 133rd, attached to the 4th Marine Division, suffered the heaviest casualties in CB history: 40 killed, 156 wounded, and 48 evacuated due to sickness, out of roughly 100 men. Despite heavy casualties and constant fighting, American construction continued at a pace that would have stunned Japanese engineers. Within days of the initial landings, damaged Japanese airfields were already being repaired. By February 26th, only 1 week after D-Day, the first American aircraft, an OY-1 artillery spotter, landed on the repaired airfield. By March 4th, while the battle was still ongoing, the first B-29 made an emergency landing. Dynamite of the 9th Bombardment Group had been damaged over Tokyo and could not return to the Marianas. The rapidly repaired Eniwetak airfield saved both the aircraft and its crew. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi did not survive to record his observations on American construction capabilities, dying in the final Japanese assault on March 26, 1945. However, his pre-invasion assessment, preserved in Japanese military archives and later translated, acknowledged U.S. material superiority. The enemy's offensive power and equipment are superior, and it is difficult for us to match them. What Kuribayashi could not predict was the speed at which Americans could build under fire. One striking example highlights the construction gap. Japanese forces on Mount Suribachi had spent 2 years attempting to build a road to the summit. Within 2 weeks of capturing the mountain, CBS bulldozers had cleared a road all the way to the top. Marine Corps historians recount that this feat reportedly caused a captured Japanese officer to weep, though the specific individual cannot be verified. By the end of the battle on March 26th, over 2,400 B-29s had made emergency landings on Eniwetak, saving roughly 27,000 airmen. These airfields were built and maintained under constant enemy fire, something Japanese military doctrine had never considered possible. The battle for Okinawa, beginning April 1, 1945, offered the final major Japanese observation of American construction capabilities. Colonel Yahara, senior operations officer of the Japanese 32nd Army, was uniquely positioned to witness and understand these operations. Unlike many senior Japanese officers, Yahara survived the battle and later published his memoirs, The Battle for Okinawa, providing one of the few detailed Japanese accounts of American operations. Yahara had served as an exchange officer in the United States from 1933 to 1935, studying at Fort Moultrie and traveling extensively to observe American military facilities. His pre-war knowledge of U.S. capabilities was more advanced than most Japanese officers, yet what he saw at Okinawa exceeded even his expectations. The scale of American construction at Okinawa was staggering. Within hours of the April 1st landing, U.S. forces captured Kadena and Yontan airfields, which the Japanese had inexplicably left largely undefended. By April 3rd, CBS from the 58th Battalion and the 1901st Aviation Engineer Battalion were repairing and extending both fields. Within a week, American fighters were operating from these airfields, providing close air support to ground forces. The construction effort expanded rapidly. Eventually, 95,000 Army and Navy construction personnel worked on Okinawa. Plans included facilities for 4,000 aircraft. The 8th, 10th, 70th, and 11th Naval Construction Brigades built not only airfields but entire port facilities, ammunition depots, hospitals, and supply centers, essentially creating a fully functional military city while combat continued. Yahara's memoir notes his awareness of American superiority, though he focused more on tactical and strategic effects than technical details. He observed that U.S. forces could establish operational bases faster than Japanese units could organize counterattacks. His description of the April 19th Japanese counteroffensive shows the futility of attacking American positions continuously reinforced by rapidly constructed facilities. What Japanese officers witnessed but could not fully explain was a fundamental difference in military philosophy. Japanese doctrine emphasized spiritual strength and the warrior's spirit to overcome material shortcomings. American forces combined combat power with industrial capability. CBS units were combat engineers, equally adept with rifles and bulldozers. Civilian construction expertise was integrated directly into military operations. The Japanese had no equivalent. Their construction units were either lightly equipped military engineers or conscripted civilian laborers with no combat ability. Captured 17th. Set-tie records from the Solomons show their units had no combat training and minimal equipment. They were pure laborers, unlike the multi-skilled CBS. The full extent of Japanese intelligence failure regarding American construction became clear only after the war. The Strategic Bombing Survey from 1945 to 1946 included extensive interrogations of Japanese military and civilian officials. These interviews, combined with captured documents translated by ATIS, reveal that Japanese planners fundamentally misunderstood American industrial and construction power. Vice Admiral Shigeru Fukuome, Chief of Staff of the Combined Fleet and later commander of the Second Air Fleet, admitted post-war that Japanese naval planning had never accounted for the speed of American base construction. Pre-war Japanese doctrine assumed that capturing an island meant securing a position that could be held for months while reinforcements arrived. The American ability to convert captured islands into offensive bases within days or weeks invalidated this concept. The numbers highlight this intelligence failure. Japanese planners estimated that building a 6,000 FT runway for heavy bombers required 3,000 to 5,000 laborers over 3 to 6 months. American CBS achieved the same with 2,100 men in 20 days. This 5 to 6-fold efficiency, combined with simultaneous deployment of multiple battalions, created construction speeds the Japanese could not imagine. Equipment differences were equally stark. A single D8 bulldozer could move more earth in 1 hour than 300 manual laborers could in a day. By 1944, American forces in the Pacific had hundreds of such machines. The Japanese had so few bulldozers that captured U.S. equipment was considered more valuable than almost any other war material. The construction gap reflected deeper industrial and organizational differences. Japanese military construction relied on traditional methods adapted from civilian practices. Manual labor with picks, shovels, and human-powered transport dominated, reflecting both equipment shortages and military culture. Japanese military doctrine valued spiritual strength and physical endurance above all. Manual labor was not simply a necessity due to limited equipment. It was considered a way to build character and reinforce spiritual resolve. American construction operated on an entirely different principle: full industrialized military engineering. The Naval Construction Battalions, CBS, were composed of men recruited from the construction industry with years of civilian experience. They brought professional industrial methods directly to military operations. Time and motion studies, maintenance schedules, and standardized procedures, common in U.S. civilian construction, were fully applied to military projects. Prefabrication and mass standardization defined American construction, a concept foreign to Japanese practice. Master matting, Quonset huts, and standardized fuel tanks could be mass-produced in factories and shipped as complete systems, while Japanese construction relied on local materials and custom-built solutions for each project. This meant American forces could build faster and more consistently across multiple locations. The psychological impact on Japanese troops observing American construction is apparent from the limited sources available. Prisoner interrogations, captured letters, though heavily censored, and post-war testimony. While intimate personal accounts are rare, the overall pattern is clear: a shift from initial confidence to confusion, and eventually despair. Initially, Japanese confidence was grounded in the concept of Yamato Damashi, the belief that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantages. Early successes, including Pearl Harbor and rapid Pacific conquests, reinforced this belief. Japanese forces had defeated Western powers with inferior equipment, but superior fighting spirit. The first encounters with American construction at Guadalcanal began to challenge that confidence. Henderson Field was completed quickly and remained operational despite constant bombardment. This demonstrated an organizational and industrial capability that Japanese troops could not match regardless of fighting spirit. By 1943, prisoner interrogations revealed increasing awareness of U.S. technological superiority. Captured members of Japanese units expressed amazement at American equipment. The strategic consequences of this construction advantage became clear to Japanese field commanders. Every captured airfield was operational within days. Every seized island became a base for attacking the next objective. Carefully prepared defensive perimeters intended to exhaust American forces through prolonged sieges were bypassed by rapid base construction that enabled island hopping. By 1944, the psychological effect reached senior command levels. The loss of Saipan, which placed Japan within range of B-29 bombers, contributed to the fall of the Tojo government. Military leaders understood that American construction meant every lost island immediately became a launch point for attacks on Japan. Massive B-29 bases on Saipan and Tinian were built faster than Japan could respond. Late-war defensive strategies reflect this realization. Decisions to avoid defending beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, in favor of fighting from prepared positions, showed an understanding that Americans would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The emphasis shifted to inflicting maximum casualties in the hope that high costs might force negotiation. American construction capabilities, particularly the CBS, fundamentally reshaped the Pacific War. This was not simply about building bases faster. It was a revolution in military strategy enabled by industrialized construction and organization. Island hopping, bypassing strongholds to seize less defended islands for base construction, relied entirely on rapid construction. Admiral Chester Nimitz's decision to bypass Rabaul, the major Japanese base in the Southwest Pacific, was based on the ability to quickly construct airfields on surrounding islands that neutralized Rabaul through air power. The speed of U.S. operations compressed timelines dramatically. Pre-war Japanese planning assumed a Pacific advance would require years, with long pauses to build supporting bases. Instead, American forces moved from Guadalcanal to Okinawa, covering over 3,000 mi in less than 3 years. Each captured island became a platform for the next operation. The gap between what Japanese troops saw in the field and what civilians were told at home created one of the war's largest information gaps. Japanese censorship was extensive, even by wartime standards, systematically suppressing information about American industrial and construction capabilities. Letters home were heavily edited, removing references to U.S. equipment, construction speed, and material superiority. The few uncensored letters that survived show Japanese soldiers' amazement, but these insights never reached the home front. Japanese propaganda depicted Americans as spiritually weak, dependent on material comforts and inferior in willpower. Radio Tokyo broadcasts monitored and translated by U.S. intelligence repeatedly emphasized Japanese spiritual superiority over American materialism. In reality, Americans combined material strength with the ability to endure harsh combat. Even factual reporting was distorted. The fall of Saipan was framed as heroic defense against overwhelming numbers, omitting that operational B-29 bases had been established while fighting continued. Rapid American advances through the Philippines were attributed to numerical superiority rather than unprecedented construction speed. This information gap had strategic consequences. Japanese civilian morale remained relatively intact until B-29 raids began in late 1944. Civilians could not comprehend how bombers could suddenly reach Japan when the defensive perimeter seemed intact. They did not know that American construction battalions had built massive airbase complexes on captured islands within months. By the war's end, the full scale of American construction in the Pacific highlights Japanese defeat. CBS and Army engineers transformed the region into a network of bases that made Japan's strategic position untenable. Total Seabees strength in World War II reached 325,000 men, with 80% serving in the Pacific. These men built 111 major airstrips and 441 pier facilities. They constructed ammunition magazines for 2,558 locations and warehouses covering 700 square blocks. They also built housing for one. American construction in the Pacific reached a scale that Japanese forces could barely comprehend. By the end of World War II, 5 million men had been involved in construction operations, and fuel storage facilities were built for 100 million gallons. Over 300 bases were constructed across as many islands, creating a network that allowed the U.S. to project air and naval power across the region. The equipment deployed was equally impressive. More than 50,000 bulldozers were produced during the war, with thousands sent to the Pacific. The Caterpillar D7, the backbone of Pacific construction, weighed $15,000 and could generate $25,000 of drawbar pull. Japanese forces had no equivalent machinery. The introduction of Marston matting, or pierced steel planking, revolutionized airfield construction. Each mat measured 10 ft long by 15 in wide, weighed 66 lb and had 87 drainage holes. By 1943, American factories had produced enough mats for 240 runways, each 155,000 ft, totaling 2 million tons of steel, the equivalent needed for 600 Liberty ships. These prefabricated materials allowed cleared areas to become operational airfields in hours rather than days. Human efficiency was equally remarkable. At Henderson Field, CBS maintained and repaired the runway through 140 Japanese air raids and 2 major naval bombardments. During the October 13th-14th battleship bombardment, 53 craters were filled, and the runway was operational by dawn. Repairs completed faster than the damage could be inflicted. Construction speed records were repeatedly broken. The 20-day construction of the Espiritu Santo airstrip in July 1942 set an early benchmark. By 1943, the 47th Naval Construction Battalion completed a 300 ft runway on Vangunu Island in just 9 days. The 15-hour rehabilitation of Tarawa's airfield in November 1943 demonstrated that captured Japanese facilities could be made operational almost immediately. Tinian alone showcased the scale of American construction. In less than a year, 15,000 CBS built the world's largest airbase complex. Northfield's 4 parallel 8,500 ft runways could launch 100 B-29s per day. This single complex, completed in months, could deliver more firepower to Japan than the Japanese military could deploy in defense. Okinawa's transformation was even more dramatic. Plans included facilities to support 4,000 aircraft, more than Japan's remaining air force. Port facilities, ammunition dumps for the planned invasion of Japan, hospitals for anticipated casualties, and supply depots for millions of troops were all under construction when Japan surrendered. The 95,000 construction personnel on Okinawa were building the infrastructure for the final assault on Japan, while most senior Japanese officers observing these capabilities did not survive the war. The combination of American construction records, Japanese strategic decisions, and the few surviving testimonies creates a clear picture of Japanese awareness. Colonel Yahara, who survived and wrote his memoirs, provides the most detailed first-hand account. He described American construction proceeding with mechanical precision, noting that engineering teams sometimes operated more than half a mile ahead of Marine infantry, marking construction sites under enemy fire. Yahara's post-war assessment concluded that American construction had made Japanese defensive strategy untenable. The enemy's material superiority, particularly in engineering and construction, meant that any position we evacuated would quickly become a base for further enemy advances. Captain Riki Inaguchi, senior staff officer for Admiral Onishi and creator of the kamikaze program, also testified that rapid American airbase construction had made traditional naval strategy obsolete. Every captured island immediately projected U.S. air power further west, compressing Japan's defensive perimeter faster than the military could respond. Japanese engineers who survived the war consistently expressed professional amazement. Post-war interrogations of the 17th Setai revealed that watching American construction was like seeing the future, as machines completed in hours what would take them weeks with manual labor. Strategic decisions also reflected Japanese understanding of U.S. construction. The decision to avoid defending beaches at Iwo Jima and Okinawa and instead fight from prepared positions showed recognition that Americans would establish beachheads and support facilities regardless of initial resistance. The shift from holding territory to inflicting maximum casualties demonstrated an understanding that Japanese forces could not stop American construction. The kamikaze program itself partially reflects this awareness. Conventional Japanese naval aviation required bases, maintenance, and trained ground crews. As U.S. construction battalions systematically built new bases toward Japan, while destroying Japanese facilities, conventional air operations became impossible. Kamikaze attacks requiring only one-way fuel and minimal support were a last resort response to the American construction advantage. Captured intelligence reveals Japanese attempts to counter U.S. construction. Plans included sabotage of bulldozers and power shovels, targeting equipment operators, and even using chemical weapons to disrupt construction sites. None of these plans succeeded, reflecting Japanese weaknesses and effective American security. Japanese homeland defense plans by 1945 fully acknowledged American construction capabilities. They assumed any American landing would quickly establish massive base complexes. Strategy shifted from preventing construction to forcing Americans to build bases over Japanese dead, hoping high casualties would lead to negotiation rather than unconditional surrender. By late 1944, Japanese senior leaders recognized the full strategic implications of American construction. The fall of Tojo's government after Saipan reflected the political understanding that B-29 bases would soon make Japan itself vulnerable to sustained bombardment. Japanese military planning increasingly centered on this construction threat, though it came too late to change the war's outcome. The desperate defense of Iwo Jima, where Japanese forces inflicted the highest American casualties of any Pacific battle, was driven by the understanding that the island's airfields would provide fighter support for B-29 bombers striking Japan. Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi chose to abandon traditional banzai charges in favor of a deliberate defensive strategy, recognizing that the airfields would be built regardless. The only variable was the cost in American lives. Similarly, at Okinawa, Japanese strategy focused on holding out as long as possible while kamikaze attacks targeted American naval forces, fully acknowledging that the island would inevitably become a massive U.S. base. Colonel Hiromi Yahara's defensive plan explicitly assumed that Americans would construct airfields and port facilities. The objective was not to stop construction but to inflict maximum casualties. The Japanese response progressed from initial surprise through recognition to strategic adaptation. While detailed personal records of their observations largely did not survive, the strategic decisions themselves serve as testimony. They reveal what Japanese leaders understood about American construction capabilities, even if written accounts are missing. The story of Japanese encounters with American construction battalions, Seabees, is told more through statistics and strategic outcomes than through personal testimonies. The destruction of Japanese military records and the scarcity of personal accounts mean we lack intimate perspectives on how soldiers and officers experience the shock of American engineering superiority. Yet the surviving evidence, including construction records, strategic decisions, limited testimonies, and post-war analyses, provides a clear picture of gradual recognition and its strategic impact. Japanese forces witnessed something unprecedented in military history: the full industrialization of military construction, enabling strategic advances at speeds that pre-war planning never considered. The 20-day construction of the Espiritu Santo airstrip, the 15-hour rehabilitation of Tarawa's airfield, and the massive B-29 bases on Tinian built while battles raged nearby were not just engineering feats. They demonstrated an industrial and organizational power that made Japanese defeat inevitable once Americans gained a foothold in the Pacific. For Japanese military professionals who grasped the implications, observing American construction must have been deeply demoralizing. They were facing not only American combat forces but also American industrial capability, projected across the Pacific through bulldozers and prefabricated materials. Every defensive position painstakingly built over months with manual labor could be matched or surpassed by American engineers in days or weeks. The strategic impact was clear. Rapid base construction enabled island-hopping campaigns that bypassed Japanese strongholds, compressed the timeline of the American advance from years to months, and brought Japan within range of strategic bombardment far sooner than Japanese planners had anticipated. The Pacific War was no longer just a contest of military forces. It was a contest of industrial systems, one in which Japan could not compete. Surviving Japanese testimonies consistently express amazement at American equipment and construction speed. Strategic decisions, from defensive adjustments to late-war deployments, show growing awareness of the significance of American construction. The desperate defenses at Iwo Jima and Okinawa acknowledged that U.S. bases would be built, regardless of resistance. The kamikaze program itself reflected an asymmetric response to material superiority that could not be countered conventionally. The story concludes not with dramatic personal accounts, but with strategic capitulation to industrial reality. Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast on August 15, 1945, mentioned a new and most cruel bomb, but also acknowledged that Japan's situation had deteriorated. Among the factors shaping this acknowledgement was the recognition that American forces could project industrial power across the Pacific at speeds and scales that rendered continued resistance futile. The CB motto, Construimus Batimus, we build, we fight, captured a new form of warfare. Combat engineers who could construct under fire at industrial speeds created a battlefield Japan's military tradition was unprepared to contest. The 6,000 FT airstrips completed in 20 days were not only engineering achievements, but symbols of a new type of warfare. Ultimately, the story of Japanese encounters with American construction capabilities is told less through words and more through actions. Defensive adaptations, strategic adjustments, and the ultimate acknowledgement of defeat reveal a military force gradually confronting the reality of an enemy, not just equipped to fight, but to build and project industrial power across the Pacific. This encounter's legacy extends beyond World War II. The industrialization of military construction, exemplified by Seabees in the Pacific, became a permanent element of modern warfare. The ability to rapidly establish bases, supply troops across vast distances, and build faster than enemies can destroy. Japanese forces witnessing CBS construction at impossible speeds were observing a revolution in military affairs, even if they lacked the conceptual framework to fully articulate it. The numbers speak for themselves. 111 major airstrips, 441 piers, bases for 1.5 million men. These achievements reshaped the Pacific War. For Japanese forces who watched these bases rise from jungle and coral, who saw airfields become operational in days rather than months, the rapid advance of American construction was more than statistics. It was the arrival of the future of warfare. The transformation of the Pacific through American construction capabilities remains one of the most decisive, yet underdocumented factors of the war. Japanese forces could match American courage and often tactical skill, but they could not match the industrial system that turned captured islands into offensive bases at unprecedented speed. The industrial and organizational superiority of the Seabees proved as decisive as any battle in determining the Pacific War's outcome.